Welcome, everyone, to the Dark Stories. Tonight, we delve into a case that haunted Minneapolis for decades, the brutal slaying of Jeanie Childs in the summer of 1993, a case that went cold, buried under the weight of unanswered questions, only to be resurrected by the relentless march of science and the unwavering pursuit of justice. This is the story of a life tragically cut short, a killer who walked free for years, and the silent witnesses, the DNA, and a bloody footprint that finally spoke the truth. The date was July 8th, 1993. The Minneapolis summer air hung heavy and humid. Inside her apartment at 2832 Cedar Avenue South, 35-year-old Jeanie Childs, a vibrant and independent woman, lay dead. She had been savagely attacked, stabbed an astonishing 65 times. The scene was horrific, a stark testament to a rage that seemed incomprehensible. The initial investigation was intense. Detectives meticulously combed the apartment, searching for any clue, any sliver of evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. One of the first people they spoke with was Jeannie's boyfriend, Art. He had a solid alibi, and his footprint, crucially, did not match a bloody print found at the scene, a print that would later become a silent yet powerful witness. Investigators collected DNA samples, a relatively new but promising tool in forensic science. They spoke with Jeannie's clients. She worked as a massage therapist, hoping to uncover any disgruntled individuals or potential threats. Despite their efforts, the leads dried up. Weeks turned into months, and months bled into years. The vibrant life of Jeanie Childs became a cold case file, another tragic story seemingly destined for the dusty shelves of unsolved mysteries. Fast forward to 2015. In Minneapolis, a renewed initiative was underway to revisit long-dormant cold cases, particularly those where advancements in forensic technology, especially DNA analysis, held the promise of finally revealing the truth. The sheer brutality of Jeanie Childs' murder, the high number of stab wounds suggesting a close-quarters attack, and a significant likelihood of DNA transfer made it a prime candidate for re-examination. For the investigators tasked with breathing life back into this decades-old case, the passage of time presented a formidable challenge. Witnesses' memories fade, some move away, others are no longer alive. Physical evidence, if not properly preserved, can degrade. Yet, the one silent witness from that horrific night in 1993, the biological evidence, held the potential to cut through the years of uncertainty. DNA, the unique blueprint within each of us, had become an increasingly sophisticated tool in the pursuit of justice. Even minute traces, skin cells, saliva, semen, could now be analyzed to create a genetic profile, a digital fingerprint unique to an individual. The investigators focused on the evidence collected from Jeannie's apartment in 1993, hoping that the advancements in DNA technology since then could yield a profile that was previously undetectable. They also considered the potential of the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. This national database housed DNA profiles of convicted offenders and DNA recovered from crime scenes. Could Jeannie's killer have been entered into the system for a subsequent crime? The hope, however faint, was there. As the cold case team meticulously reviewed the original files, they also began to explore a relatively new investigative avenue, forensic investigative genetic genealogy. This technique combines DNA analysis with public genealogy databases. By comparing the crime scene DNA to the vast family trees available online, investigators can identify potential relatives of the unknown suspect, building a genealogical map that might eventually lead them to the perpetrator. It was a long shot, a complex puzzle involving genetic links and historical records, but in the absence of a direct CODIS hit, it offered a glimmer of possibility. And then a name emerged: Jerry Westerm. What drew investigators to Jerry Westerm? He had been living in the vicinity of Cedar Avenue South in 1993. Furthermore, his past included arrest for prostitution-related offenses, a detail that, while not directly linked to the violent nature of Jeannie's murder, warranted further scrutiny in the context of an unsolved sexual assault and homicide. But how could they definitively link him to a crime committed 2 decades prior? They needed his DNA. Obtaining a direct sample without his knowledge or consent required careful planning and adherence to legal protocols. In a remarkable display of investigative ingenuity, the team learned that Jerry Westerm frequented hockey games. On a seemingly ordinary night, investigators discreetly followed him. As the game concluded and Westerm discarded a used hot dog napkin into a trash can, they seized the opportunity. That discarded napkin, seemingly insignificant, held the key. Saliva, a rich source of DNA, clung to its surface. Back at the lab, the DNA extracted from the napkin was analyzed and compared to the DNA profile recovered from the semen found on the comforter and a towel in Jeanie Childs' apartment, evidence meticulously preserved from that horrific night in 1993. The match was undeniable. The DNA from the discarded napkin belonged to the same individual whose semen was found at the crime scene. After 22 long years, the silent witness had finally spoken with absolute certainty. Jerry Westerm was the prime suspect in the murder of Jeanie Childs. Armed with this irrefutable DNA evidence, investigators moved swiftly. Jerry Westerm was arrested. A known DNA sample was obtained from him, further confirming the match. During his interrogation, Westerm appeared nervous and vehemently denied ever being inside Jeanie Childs' apartment. In the face of the scientific certainty of the DNA evidence, his denials rang hollow. But the DNA wasn't the only silent witness from that fateful night. Remember the bloody footprint that didn't match Jeannie's boyfriend? That piece of evidence, carefully preserved all those years, was now re-examined. Investigators obtained footprint impressions from Jerry Westerm. The meticulous comparison revealed a match. A bloody footprint at the scene belonged to Jerry Westerm, placing him inside Jeannie's apartment after the brutal attack. The prosecution built a compelling case, weaving together the irrefutable DNA evidence and the damning footprint analysis. While the murder weapon was never found and there were no living eyewitnesses to the crime itself, the scientific evidence painted a clear and damning picture. The trial began in 2017. The defense argued that the DNA could have been transferred through other means, that its mere presence didn't prove guilt. But the prosecution countered with the overwhelming statistical probability of a random DNA match and the corroborating footprint evidence, placing Westerm squarely at the scene of the crime. The jury deliberated. The weight of 2 decades of unanswered questions hung in the air. Finally, the verdict came in. Guilty. Jerry Westerm was convicted of the first-degree murder of Jeanie Childs. For Jeannie's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, a long-awaited answer to the questions that had haunted them for so long. Yet, as the Footprint to Murder documentary poignantly illustrates, a conviction cannot erase the pain of loss, the years of grief, the life that was so brutally stolen. The Jeanie Childs case serves as a powerful testament to the enduring power of forensic science, particularly DNA technology, in bringing justice to cold cases. It underscores the importance of meticulous evidence collection and preservation, even when the technology to fully analyze it doesn't yet exist. It highlights the dedication of investigators who refuse to let go of unsolved crimes, who continue to pursue justice for victims and their families, no matter how much time has passed. It also touches upon the sensitive issue of victim blaming. Some initial discussions surrounding Jeannie's lifestyle attempted to suggest she was somehow responsible for her own tragic fate. But the truth remains stark and undeniable. Jeanie Childs was the victim of a violent crime, and nothing justifies the brutality she endured. The advancements in DNA analysis and the innovative use of investigative genetic genealogy are revolutionizing cold case investigations. Cases that once seemed impossible to solve are now being cracked open, bringing long-awaited answers and a sense of justice to victims and their loved ones. The silent witnesses, the microscopic traces of DNA, the impressions left behind are finally having their day in court. Thank you for joining us tonight on The Dark Stories. The case of Jeanie Childs reminds us that even the coldest of cases can be thawed by the relentless pursuit of truth and the unwavering power of science. If you found this story gripping, please like this video and subscribe to The Dark Stories for more tales of mystery and the pursuit of justice. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember that even in the darkest of stories, the truth often leaves an indelible trace.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into the fascinating, sometimes pretty somber world of cold case investigations.
Yeah.
You've given us some really compelling stuff, practical guides for investigators, bits on crime scene psychology, the details of DNA tech, even remote sensing, which is kind of surprising.
Right. How you can find things hidden underground.
Exactly. And we've also got this gripping news story about a case finally cracked using DNA evidence.
It's a field that really highlights, the lasting impact of violent crime, but also the sheer persistence of people seeking justice, often against, incredible odds.
For the families, these cases, they never really go away, do they? It's always this search for answers.
Absolutely. And our goal here, I think, is to really get a handle on the different ways investigators approach these really tough cases and how technology is helping breathe new life into them.
Oh, they piece together the past, basically.
Precisely. How do you find the truth after so much time?
Okay, so let's start with the term itself, cold case. Sounds simple, but one of your sources says there isn't even like a single definition everyone uses.
That's a really key point right off the bat. It's pretty much up to the individual law enforcement agency.
So it varies.
Oh, definitely. For one department, a case might go cold when the main investigator gets reassigned and nobody's actively working it. Another might just use a time frame, say, any suspicious death still unsolved after a year. Or maybe it's specifically cases handed over to a dedicated cold case unit. Or, simpler still, just cases with no leads or activity for a year or more.
It's interesting, though, the label itself, cold case. You can see how that might land badly with families, right?
Absolutely. It can feel dismissive.
Like their loved one's case is just forgotten or seen as unsolvable.
Exactly. While it's a practical term for managing caseloads, we have to remember the human cost. Hope doesn't just fade for those families, and that label can feel like, another blow.
So whether it's a fresh case or one that's decades old, there's some basic questions investigators always have to tackle, aren't there? Like the absolute fundamentals.
Precisely. The core questions don't change. What actually happened? Why was this person killed? Who could have done it? Who had the opportunity? How did they do it? And where?
That's the bedrock.
It really is. Doesn't matter how old the case file is.
And then you get into that classic framework. Motive, opportunity means MOM, right?
Yep, MOM.
How does that apply when you're looking back years later? Do motives get reevaluated?
Well, the potential motives are still broad, but time can bring new perspectives. Your sources list things like murder-suicide, thrill kills, self-defense claims, random violence, sex crimes, sadism, love triangles, jealousy, drug connections, gang stuff. Revisiting these, but maybe with new witness info or evidence that didn't make sense before, that's key.
It sounds like the whole approach has really shifted. It's not just, like you said, pulling dusty boxes off a shelf.
That's a good way to put it. There's no single magic bullet for solving these. Every case is its own puzzle. Modern cold case work is really this blend of old school police work and cutting edge forensic science and tech.
And it seems to hinge on two main things that can suddenly make a cold case solvable again.
Right. Your sources point to two primary drivers: changes in technology and changes in relationships.
Okay, technology makes sense. DNA, better forensics. But relationships.
Think about it. Time passes. Loyalties shift. People who were maybe scared to talk before or were protecting someone, maybe they aren't anymore. Guilt can build up.
So someone might finally come forward after years.
Exactly. We see it happen. An old accomplice, maybe, finally decides they need to clear their conscience. Time changes people and their connections.
The sources also mention something about police training itself improving over time. Like, standards for detectives are higher now.
Generally, yes. Selection processes, training protocols, they've evolved. So a fresh look at an old file by a modern investigator might spot things, avenues that were missed back then, maybe just because the approach to the training was different.
Like a more experienced eye on the same puzzle?
That's a great analogy. What wasn't obvious then might jump out now.
But then there are those factors that are just beyond anyone's control, right? Cases with zero physical evidence, maybe no witnesses or witnesses who won't talk.
Absolutely. Or you can't even identify the victim sometimes. That's a huge hurdle.
Yeah.
Add in things like an unknown weapon or the silence around gang or drug crimes or the crime scene itself. Was it public, private? Did that affect evidence preservation?
And the tech available at the time might just not have been good enough for the evidence they did collect.
Precisely. Which brings us neatly to the big one.
DNA.
DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid. It really has been a game changer.
It's kind of mind-blowing how far it's come.
It truly is. It's the blueprint for an organism, right?
Right.
And crucially, it's the same in almost every cell in your body, and it stays the same your whole life.
So even a tiny trace left behind
Can potentially be matched, to a suspect, a victim, using reference samples.
And the key is those STRs, short tandem repeats.
Exactly, short tandem repeats. Think of them like specific spots in your DNA where short patterns repeat over and over. The number of repeats varies a lot between people.
So it's like a genetic fingerprint.
Kind of, yeah. Forensic profiling analyzes how many repeats you have at several different STR locations. It creates a unique profile, like a barcode.
And there's mitochondrial DNA, too.
Right, that's found outside the cell nucleus. It's often useful for older or more degraded samples, like getting echoes from the past. It's inherited differently just from the mother.
Okay, so getting that profile, it sounds like a pretty detailed process.
It is multi-stage. First, careful collection, any potential biological stuff from the scene or people involved. Then you extract the DNA, purify it. Then quantify it, measure how much you have. Then you target those specific STR regions and amplify them. Make millions of copies using PCR.
PCR, polymerase chain reaction. That name keeps coming up.
Because it's so important. Then you separate those amplified fragments by size, and the resulting pattern is your DNA profile, which you compare to others.
But it's not foolproof. Your sources mention potential problems like mix-ups or contamination.
Oh, absolutely critical things to consider. Mistakes can happen. Samples get mislabeled. Contamination can creep in during extraction in the lab. It's rare with good protocols, but possible.
And old samples might be tricky anyway.
Definitely. You might have DNA from multiple people mixed together. Or the DNA itself might be degraded, broken down over time. That's why how you collect and store evidence is so vital.
Right, things like superglue, fuming for prints, and touch DNA.
Yeah, cyanoacrylate fuming. It helps preserve delicate traces. And properly drying biological fluids, packaging them in breathable paper bags or boxes, not plastic that stops moisture buildup and further degradation.
Okay, and then there's CODIS, the big database.
The Combined DNA Index System. Yeah, it's huge. It lets agencies compare crime scene DNA profiles against convicted offenders nationwide.
So it links cases.
Yes, links serial crimes that seemed unrelated. It can point to suspects you didn't know existed. It even helps identify missing persons by matching unidentified remains to relative samples. It's incredibly powerful.
And the amazing thing is, evidence stored properly, even for decades, can still yield a profile.
It really can. Which is exactly why reevaluating old cases is so worthwhile. That evidence might hold the key now, even if it didn't back then.
And that PCR technique you mentioned, that's key for these tiny or degraded samples. You said it makes copies.
Millions of copies from just a tiny starting amount. It's like taking a microscopic speck and making it shout its story decades later. It's almost science fiction turned reality, honestly.
Wow. So investigators really need to stay plugged in with the crime labs, right? To know what's possible now.
Constant communication is essential. Labs know the latest on STR analysis, mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome analysis for male lineage. They can advise on the best approach, the costs, the logistics of retesting old stuff.
In those exclusion cases, where DNA cleared the original suspect.
Those need revisiting too. That unknown profile that cleared the first guy might now match someone else in CODIS. The database is always growing.
And this idea of a John Doe warrant.
Yeah.
Based just on a DNA profile.
It's a clever legal tool. If you have a solid DNA profile from a scene, but no name to attach to it, you can get a warrant issued for John Doe identified by that specific genetic code.
So it keeps the case legally alive. Stops the clock on the statute of limitations.
Essentially, yes, until you get a match, maybe years later.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The human side. Psychological autopsies. Trying to figure out someone's state of mind before they died.
Yeah, it can be really valuable, especially if the manner of death is ambiguous. Was it suicide, accident, homicide? You gather everything you can about their life, behavior, relationships, stresses.
To build a picture of their mental state.
Exactly. Trying to reconstruct their psychological world to find clues the physical evidence might miss.
And then Crime scene staging. That sounds complicated. Why would someone do that?
It's all about deception. Making a homicide look like a suicide or an accident, maybe to hide the real crime, protect their identity, or point the finger elsewhere.
And spotting that in a cold case must be tough.
Especially if the original scene was misinterpreted as, say, a natural death or an accident. You're looking for inconsistencies years later.
The sources mentioned firearms were common in staged homicides. Is that significant?
It's a data point investigators might note, yeah. But the sources also caution that trying to create neat categories or typologies for staging built on behavior, well, it's tricky.
Because the patterns overlap too much.
Right. There's not enough solid empirical support yet to say, okay, this specific setup means this type of offender or motive. It's more about looking for inconsistencies within that specific scene. Does the physical evidence match the story the scene seems to be telling? Does it match the victim's known personality?
We have that really tragic example, though, the 1937 Noakes family deaths, where behavioral analysis was used.
That's a deeply disturbing case. 3 young girls smothered. Then the father and his niece found dead in an apparent suicide pact, miles away.
A real puzzle.
And behavioral analysis helped piece together a likely timeline, explore motives, financial desperation, complex family stuff, the father's known anger issues. It helped rule out things like accidental death.
But there were still mysteries, right? Like why they went to Philadelphia. Why didn't he sell things if they needed money?
Exactly. It doesn't solve everything, but it provides a framework, a way to understand the likely sequence of events and the father's probable mindset, even without definitive physical proof for every step. It shows you can learn a lot by looking beyond just the physical clues.
Chilling. Okay, completely different angle now. Remote sensing. Using geophysics. Like for finding buried things.
Yeah, techniques like ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, electrical resistivity, they can help locate clandestine graves or hidden evidence without having to dig up huge areas. It's non-invasive.
Sounds like something out of archaeology, but for crime scenes.
It has similarities. And just like archaeology, planning is crucial.
You need to know what you're looking for.
Definitely. What's the target size? How deep might it be? What methods are best for this specific site? What are the soil conditions? Are there power lines or metal junk that could interfere? Who owns the land? Has anyone searched here before?
There's even a questionnaire, the NecroSearch one.
Yes, to gather all that critical info before you start scaring.
And the actual search involves grids and calibration.
Yep. Systematic grids ensure you cover the area thoroughly. And doing test scans over something known, like a simulated grave, helps you understand how the equipment reacts in those specific conditions and fine-tune the settings.
It's not just about the tech, though. Mapping the site itself sounds important, too.
Absolutely. A detailed map showing surface features, buildings, fences, trees, scrap metal, even changes in soil or plants is vital for interpreting the geophysical data later. Anomalies might be caused by known surface features, not necessarily what you're looking for.
And you need experts for this, right? People who actually understand geophysics.
You definitely need qualified geophysicists to run the equipment and, crucially, interpret the data. It's complex. Some states even require them to be licensed.
And it all gets written up in a report.
Yes, a full report with the data maps, site description, methods used, and a clear interpretation of what the anomalies might mean. That guides the next steps, maybe targeted digging.
Okay, let's bring it all together with that Solves case example. Jeanie Childs in Minneapolis, murdered in 1993.
A really powerful story of persistence. That case went cold for, 25 years?
Yeah, until 2018. And the breakthrough came from DNA again.
DNA again. Specifically, blood evidence from this scene, which was preserved well, was finally analyzed using commercial genealogy websites.
So, like those ancestry sites people use.
Similar databases, yeah. That process generated a lead pointing towards Jerry Westerm, who had links to the area and some past offenses.
So they surveilled him.
They did, and in 2019, they managed to get his DNA indirectly from a napkin he threw away at a hockey game.
Seriously. A napkin?
A napkin. And the lab confirmed. The DNA from the napkin matched the DNA from the blood and semen found at the 1993 crime scene.
Wow. And there was other evidence, too.
Oh, yeah. His DNA was on a bloody towel, a washcloth, the victim's T-shirt in the sink, his semen on her comforter. And they even found his footprint in her blood on the floor.
Pretty overwhelming.
Absolutely. It led to his conviction in 2022. Justice, finally, after almost 30 years, thanks to that combination of preserved evidence and new DNA technology.
It's a great outcome for that case, but the stats your sources mention are pretty sobering. Only about half of murders get solved with an arrest.
Around that, yeah. And the clearance rate is often worse, sadly, when the victim is Black or African American.
Why is that?
It's complex. Factors include witness reluctance, maybe fear of retaliation, maybe distrust of law enforcement in some communities, and just the grim reality that the longer a case goes unsolved, especially past that first year, the harder it becomes.
The impact on families, communities, it's devastating when there are no answers.
That lack of closure is immense, which is why that collaboration we talked about, police, labs, prosecutors working together on these old cases, is so incredibly important.
And always keeping the victim and their family front and center.
Always.
We also can't ignore the practical issues like DNA backlogs.
Yes, backlogs for processing offender samples for CODIS and for analyzing evidence from active and cold cases. It's a persistent challenge. Resources are always stretched.
And dealing with old evidence packaging. Things degrading.
Investigators need to be ready for that. Consulting the lab on how to handle potentially fragile or improperly stored evidence, maybe repackaging it correctly, is key. And that chain of custody.
Absolutely critical. You have to track its every move.
Every single step, documented perfectly. Or the evidence might be useless in court.
Even statutes of limitations. They might not be a dead end.
There can be exceptions, especially for serious crimes like murder, or if new evidence like DNA emerges. That's why talking to prosecutors early in a cold case review is vital, to understand the legal landscape.
And deciding which cases to even look at. Prioritizing sounds important.
You have to be strategic. Maybe focus on cases with untested sexual assault kits, or cases where biological evidence exists that could benefit from new DNA techniques. You categorize based on solvability factor.
Where do you even find these cases to review? Old logbooks.
All sorts of places. Logbooks, talking to retired investigators who might remember details, searching old databases. Sometimes victims' families or witnesses come forward years later. You have to cast a wide net.
And always remember to run new profiles through CODIS.
Absolutely. Proactively ask the CODIS administrators to search new profiles against local, state, and national databases. Maximize the chances of a hit.
So, wrapping this up. It's clear cold case work is incredibly tough. It leans so heavily now on forensic tech, especially DNA, but also on new ways of investigating and just sheer persistence.
Definitely. But you also highlighted that human element changing relationships, psychological insights, they're just as crucial. It's a real mix.
Our mission was to get a better handle on how these seemingly impossible cases get solved, the methods, the challenges. I think we've really dug into that.
We've covered a lot of ground, yeah. From the definition to DNA to geophysics and back to the human stories.
So here's a final thought for you listening. With forensic science evolving so fast and our understanding of people always deepening, what answers might still be hiding in cases we think are totally cold? And as technology lets us look back with such powerful new tools, what ethical questions does that raise? It really makes you think about the resources, the complexity, and the drive needed to find justice sometimes decades later, and why we need to keep pushing innovation in this area.